Thank you for registering and for attending this webinar on the Post-Lilac Fire efforts on assessment, implementation, and assistance. My name is René Vidales, and I'm going to be talking about the assessment efforts for areas that were burned due to the Lilac Fire and the assessment for the erosion control BMPs. I'm going to have Jeremy Fantaroni follow me in discussing the implementation efforts of implementing those recommended BMPs. And lastly, we're going to have Mehdi Khalili, who's going to be talking about the homeowner assistance efforts. So this started on December in 2017. It was around the time of the holidays, and we do have an application here at the county for all sorts of things that are emergency related. It's called SD Emergency. And I hope that a lot of other government agencies also have those efforts, because it really helps when you are sending out alerts to everybody. So when the fire started, it was in December in 2017, and the date was December 7th. The alert sent out all these notifications to anybody who had the application. They didn't need to be logged in, they didn't need to have their application open, it just pops in. And what that does is alerts people as to what's going on, what is the area that is being active right now, and the size of the size of the fire, essentially. And with that, there's mobilization efforts. The county starts mobilizing crews, and then ultimately evacuation orders are issued, and people start evacuating on certain routes. So all these efforts are happening, and people are constantly getting alerts as to the status of the fire. So in numbers, this is what we have. The flames broke out December 7th, and just after 11 a.m., so it was in the morning, people were obviously awake at work, etc. And the location was the intersection of I-15 and SR-76 in the Bonsall area, which is an unincorporated area of the county of San Diego. We had about 1,300 residents that were forced to evacuate, and we had nearby shelters available for them. About the size of the fire ultimately reached 4,100 acres by the end of the fire, which was December 13th. 114 homes were totally destroyed. There were other homes that were damaged, so we counted 55 that were damaged. Luckily, we didn't have any human fatalities due to the fire, but we had at least 45 horses that were killed during that effort. So we are, the unincorporated county has a vast amount of horse riding activities, and also horse barns and horse breeding, etc. So there's a lot of horse barns out there. But and some of the horses that were able to actually be transported to other facilities that were not part of the fire area. As of today, the cause of the fire still remains under investigation. So that there continues to be more investigation about that. So in costs, and these are all numbers that are publicly available on a report that I'm going to be announcing pretty soon. So the cost of the emergency response was about $5 million, and this will be offset by state and federal reimbursement. There's two agencies, federal government, between FHWA and NRCS, that we're talking to in order to work on reimbursements, and there's one state agency, which is Cal OES, the Office of Emergency Services. This was the County of San Diego's first use of the federal wireless emergency alert system. So we're glad that we were able to use this for the first time. We're starting getting damage reports. We got this map. It's just an early map, and this map just shows the damage at the parcel level. So what you see there in yellow or in light color are the parcels that have at least one dwelling unit that was destroyed. Any of the other parcels in blue is where you had damaged structures or other structures that were not the primary structure that were destroyed. And we're looking at the parcels here, and at first glance you see a really large parcel right here, and that large parcel really is an equestrian facility. So you only have one primary residence, but you have a lot of secondary and a lot of dwelling structures like horse barns, etc. So in this case, the primary structure burned down, and a lot of other structures also burned down. There's we're looking at the parcel level here, so we're not getting a big picture just with this map. So this was just the beginning, and now we're looking at the actual damage that was done by the fire individually in structures. So you start seeing concentrated areas around here, around the east, where most of the concentrated area happened. In the central area of the fire, you also have some other concentrated areas. And then on the western portion of the fire, you have a little bit more isolated pockets here and there. So anything in red in this exhibit is what was destroyed. It could be a primary residence, it could be a second dwelling unit or other outlying structures. And everything you see in yellow is what was damaged, whether it was a primary residence or other outlying secondary structures. Just for reference, if you're familiar with the County of San Diego, this is the Interstate 15. This is State Route 76. And I think that's about as much as this map shows. So now we're going to go and focus locally into really small areas. This is Mobile Home Park, which is a senior community, and this is where the majority of the structures burned down. You can see that, you know, some of them are really contiguous to each other, and that's what happens in this case of fires. You know, if you don't have buffers between structures, then the fire just jumps from one structure to the other. Unluckily, for this particular mobile home park, this was not the first time that they were part of a fire. There was a fire in 2014 where the slopes over here burned down, and there were other casualties as a result of the previous fire. Looking at the central portion, we have some pockets here around State Route 76, where structures were either destroyed or partially destroyed, and along, this is what we call West Lilac Road. There was a number of structures here, and there are also a number of structures here on the array. Ultimately, this is the western portion. Here we see a lot more isolated pockets of, we did see a number of primary residences that burned down in here. It just happens to be, the fires are unpredictable, but there's also topography that contributes and the amount of dry vegetation around those areas. Most of the information here that I'm providing has been published online. This was published on March 2nd of this year, and it's called the Lilac Fire After Action Report. You can download it, and it has a lot more information of other efforts that happened, including, all the different fire rescue operations, all the different, helicopters, all the different efforts, from different departments and even agencies that were involved. Because in this presentation, we're only focusing about the assessment of the burned areas to implement BMPs. We're focusing on the implementation, and we're focusing on the homeowner assistance. There were a lot of other efforts that happened that I'm not going to be covering in this presentation, because that would take a number of hours just to go through that. So let's focus back on our presentation. So the first portion is the assessment effort. There was field reconnaissance. There were a couple of them done. One of them was done by land, which is driving a truck. And what you have to remember is a lot of these roads were closed right after the fires, so they were only open to fire rescue operations. Of course, our County Department of Public Works that was making different drive-bys to make assessments. The other reconnaissance was done by air, and it was done through a flyby by helicopter. So now that we know that we have this area in red, that is the boundary of the Lilac Fire, we have to determine what are we going to be focusing on to protect our public roads from any debris that may come down if in case we have one of those significant storm events. And what other things do we need to protect, including private structures? So we split up the work into different components. One of them was high priority roads, which we'll call HPRs, which really include the public right-of-way and anything that drains into public right-of-way. And the other portion will be the high priority sites or high priority structures, which are all on private property. So the first thing to take into consideration is, well, if we're going to be doing any walking on private property, we need to obtain right-of-way agreements. So we need to do that not just for the high priority sites, structures within the sites, but also within the private property that is draining into the public roads. So one big challenge is that we didn't have the template ready, so we needed to come up quickly with the template to have the right-of-way agreement ready for start knocking on people's doors and tell them why it is important for them to sign a right-of-way entry agreement. It's not the most pleasant conversation you want to have with a property owner, but it's something that needs to happen. They are basically allowing the county, by signing this agreement, to come in and implement BMPs that will protect the road and in some cases protect their private structures. The other big component here is because the county doesn't have all the resources to do the work themselves, we got to rely on contracts. So there were contracts for doing the assessments. There was a contract for doing the, for using inspectors when we implemented the BMPs. There was no contract in place for the erosion control and the hydromulch. So we needed to do an RFQ, request for qualifications and request for bids. And we also needed a contract for traffic control, which was in place. So a lot of things that were needed were either in place or maybe in place, but didn't have enough capacity on the contract. Or in some cases, we didn't have a contract avenue at all. So everything needed to be done really, really quickly. And these are some of the BMPs that we considered. Jeremy Fantaroni is going to be covering in detail all of these as far as what they do and where we use them. So it's a big menu of BMPs, but that's really what we're here to talk about. Culvert cleanout was one of them. This is very, you don't think about this, but you find out that the culverts needed cleaning even before the fires. You also needed inlet protection in order to prevent any debris from going into the culverts as a result of any significant storm events. You're going to see that check dams, berms are going to be widely used during these efforts through the photos. Chevrons and K-rails, which are interesting because you have to transport them, and there's different types of K-rails. So it's always a matter of choosing the best K-rail that will fit your particular scenario. We also use fiber rolls and energy dissipators. And hydromulch was the one that was used for vast areas that needed erosion control. So we split up the work in 3 areas like I described before. The western area along Olive Hill Road is one of them. In this case, you see that all the white ash is a result of the high temperatures during the fires. And some of the BMPs you're going to see Okay, we're having some technical difficulties here. Some of the BMPs you're going to see, you're going to see that first, in order to assess the area, the important thing is to document everything. In order to come up with the BMPs, you have to start measuring things. You have to flag where you're proposing your BMPs, in this case, the downstream areas. There's also part of the lessons learned here is that even though we're doing all this work, we're in the field, we're under a crunch time because we are getting threats of a significant storm event. We're realizing later on that we're starting to walk around sites that are not necessarily private property that is draining into public right-of-way. In this case, we found out that this massive area that you see on the slide was part of an open space reserve that belonged to the state, so different agency in this case. We also found out that there were some vast areas that were draining to roads. In this case, we implemented hydromulch and along with other BMPs, such as the benches and the different sandbags. In this case, we use burlap bags. All right, we apologize for the delay and technical difficulty, certainly. So I was talking about this culvert here and how everything needed to be cleaned out even before the fire started. So this was one of the implementation measures. We did find that a lot of areas with steep slopes like the one you see on the left, there's not enough space to put in a K-rail in some locations. So we have to come up with some other alternatives. In this case, we came up with the hydromulch because there was just no room for the K-rail. We had along one particular highway, which was Highway 395. In this case, we had some steep canyons, so we really needed to do some hiking off of the road just to get to the bottom of the road where there was a culvert in order to assess the location and be in order to implement some BMPs. We were at this location. We were asked to move by our sheriff. In this case, they were doing some buckets, dropping some water because the fires were still active. So we had to evacuate immediately from what we're doing. So there's sort of some time constraints in the efforts in the field. There's a lot of moving parts, and we're part of that. And like I was talking before about this mobile home park that sustained casualties in a previous fire, what we did find is that the BMPs from the previous fire were still there, and they were still effective. So we took a look at them, and we just provided some reinforcement to some of them. We're moving now into the private structures. So we're trying to protect a few of the private structures that are likely to sustain some damage in the next significant storm event. So we provided some hydromulch and some other fiber rolls in order to protect the houses. In this case, we had a subdivision there. You don't see it on the top because Google Earth at the time of the fire was not updated. So all those brand new single family homes were right there. And one of the experiences here and lessons learned is that even though you see nothing there in Google Earth, it doesn't mean that there's nothing there, because there was a subdivision and I was very aware of it, including during the time when the fire was being reported live, and even the reporters didn't know during the live broadcast as to what was going on and were there any people there or not. So one of the big lessons learned, you're always moving along, you're always getting more information. The right-of-way agreements were always mutating. In this case, some areas were expanding, and we were constantly either getting more right-of-way agreements or visiting more properties to get more right-of-way agreements. One lesson learned for me is that if you have an iPhone, you're taking a lot of photos, there's a way that you can find out where the photos were taken, because after a few sites, everything starts looking the same. So documentation is key. So if you see that circle there, I zoom in into that, and then I see, oh, these are the streets where I took all those photos. So that's one tool that you have with the iPhone. I'm sure that Android also has a similar feature that you can find out where your photos are taken. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to Jeremy Fantaroni to talk about implementation of BMPs at those particular sites.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Fantaroni with the County of San Diego Watershed Protection Program, and I'll be going over the implementation of the high priority road sites. So I'll just start. Here's the overview of the BMPs that we use for this effort. If I gave this presentation about 10 years ago, you'd see a lot more fiber rolls, you'd see a lot more berms and large check dams structures. This time around, we had a little bit a different approach on how we implemented the BMPs. We we didn't install as many fiber rolls this time. We wanted to keep crews off the slopes from disturbing the slopes, and also the ash, just try to minimize dust and ash from climbing up these areas. So the BMP that we relied heavily on this time was the hydraulic mulch and chevrons. However, we did utilize all these different BMPs if necessary. So again, I'm going to go through all our high priority road sites. Again, this was to make sure that the roads were safe during storm events. Try to minimize any flooding or debris flow onto the streets. I'll be going through, if you're familiar with this area, I'll be going along Olive Hill Road and then going through West Lilac Road to Old Highway 395 and then ending at Rancho, the Monserrate community. So once we got all our contracts in place, we got all our right of entry agreements, we did all the assessments, we're finally able to get the crews out there and start implementing and installing the BMPs. A large storm event was coming in right when we had all these things in place, so we went to some of the high priority areas. This was a storm event that caused the same storm event that caused the flooding in the Montecito area up in Santa Barbara. This area, we only got about 3 inches of rain, around 2.5 to 3 inches, I believe, was a storm event, but it was more significant than they originally predicted. So this is along Olive Hill Road. As you can see, there's a bridge that this was access to someone's driveway, and it got burnt in the. But I guess their home got saved, but this access road to their driveway got destroyed. You can see a large drainage channel coming in, and then here's the culvert at the very end that we're trying to protect. As you can see, we implemented some inlet protection devices with gravel-filled burlap bags, and we also installed a check dam structure to try to slow down the water and catch some of the debris. So as you can see from that rain event, this structure held back quite a bit of debris and sediment from entering, and we were able to keep the culvert clear, so water was able to go under the road and not flood the roadway. After this storm event, we had the crews come out here, clean the area, and eventually hydromulch this area. So as we're going along Olive Hill Road, as you can see, these slopes, it's a really pretty road, but these slopes had vegetation. The fire destroyed all the vegetation. You can see all these kind of almost pre-existing conditions to this area. So this is obviously of concern for debris flow going onto the street. And so some of the BMPs, again, we implemented was hydraulic mulch in this area. This is one of the areas that we also did some K-rail, installation of K-rail. And then also in certain drainage channels, we installed some check dams with gravel bags. So the hydraulic mulch application we went with, because this is a fire, it's a little different than a construction site. We're really concerned with debris and ash, and even when it's windy, the ash can become become an issue as well. So we did a two-stage approach for our hydro mulch. We did a step one. The first step consisted of a heavy, basically a heavy tactifier mix. The idea was to use a heavy tactifier mix and then to mat down the ash, and then we come back right after the contractors installed the heavy tack mix. The second step was to do a more traditional 2,000 pounds of mulch with 4% tactifier per acre. So even though it's a two-stage process, we actually did some cost savings because we didn't use actually as much as the mulch tactifier mix, and it was very effective. Here's Olive Hill Road. As you can see, there's a large drainage channel coming. This was the one that René spoke about. That was I think Caltrans property, mitigation property. So we weren't able to get on this area, but so we did install some some K-rails at right where at this location. And as you can see, there is actually vegetative buffer that didn't get burned. So that also assisted in minimizing any sediment from entering the road. Here's HPR 3A. This is again along Olive Hill Road. Here's a little different application. There's a large burned area upslope of this V ditch right here. So we had crews just come in, and the V ditch had tumbleweeds and various just sediment in it. So we cleaned out the V ditch, and then we also installed some check dams to try to minimize the sediment from entering into the storm drain system. So now I'm moving along West Lilac Road. As you can see here, we have our erosion control, our erosion crews installing this large check dam structure. Again, we use burlap gravel bags for a majority of the installation for these structures, actually all of them. In the past, we did use kind of a variety of things. We use poly bags filled with sand, and we find that the poly bags, after they degrade, they become messy, and they're just and then the sand kind of it just creates a messy situation. So we decided to go with the gravel bags with the burlap gravel bags. So we did this structure right here. You can see is 4 bags high. So we did the pyramid, the 4, 3, 2, 1 installation for all the check dam structures. Well, for majority of the structures, we use that technique. And you can see the erosion control crews out here installing them. And then we were able to find areas along the road to stage some of the small equipment that we needed, and also store some of the material just temporarily. Also, so once, and again for this site, once we installed all the structures, we went and hydromulched the last step. So here's HPR 5. As you can see, this is like the largest structure that we built in the past. Some of the check dam structures we went 6 bags high, 5 bags, but this time we didn't want any of the structures to be larger than 4 bags high. Okay, so sorry about that. So I'll continue going along West Lilac Road. Here's HPR 6 site. On this site, we use a different approach, kind of called the Band-Aid approach, where we use gravel bags, and we use in the existing rills and gullies in these areas. We filled some of the gullies with gravel bags to try to minimize any additional erosion happening in these areas. There's obviously an existing condition here that there's some erosion happening with the fires that can exacerbate that. So we want to minimize any further erosion to these rills and gullies. Okay, you can. This is HPR 7. This site, there's about just over 2 acres of hydromulching that we did here, and we also had a large drainage channel coming into this area at the bottom, where we decided to install some riprap, a 1/4 ton riprap with the geotextile fabric underneath it to minimize any further erosion to this area. We also, this is a good example of some inlet protection that we did along the roadways. We had to be really careful. We kind of had to go reassess a lot of these areas to make sure that none of the gravel bags were encroaching on the road. We wanted to try to keep them off the shoulder and try to minimize. There's a lot of bikers in this area. There's a lot of traffic, and it's really a tight road to drive on. So we kept all the structures, for the most part, off the road, and try to minimize any structures on the shoulder. We also want to make sure that you can keep going to the next slide. We also want to make sure, that the gravel bags, the height of the gravel bag was lower to the road, just to make sure no water would get diverted to the road to cause a potential hazardous or dangerous situation. So this is HPR 8. This is another example of some quarter-ton riprap that we installed. In this, there's a large drainage area above this. And there was already some existing erosion going on here, so we wanted to shore this area up with some riprap. And then we also installed hydro mulch in this area. So next slide, please. So this is HPR 9. So this area, we had our roads crew. Actually, with a lot of these installations, our roads crew, county roads crews, did the culvert cleanouts and cleaned up the swales, any existing debris or sediment that were in these channels that we identified. And prior to installing any of these, we had our road crews come out and clean them up. That gave us extra capacity for the devices, and it made it easier for us to install them. This is an example of a check dam installed in a concrete, or yeah, I think it looks like an asphalt drainage channel. And again, we want to keep the end of the check dam out of the road, off the shoulder, and make sure that the weir at the low portion of the check dam the elevation was lower than the road. So we don't want to kick any water into the road. All right, next slide. So here's HPR 10. On the left, you can see we installed some riprap. This was a large drainage channel. This was a difficult one to access. We had to do with our hydro mulch. We had to do traffic control to get the riprap in here. So we had to do a lane closure. We had to have traffic control come out. This took us about a half a day to get the riprap, quarter-ton riprap, and the filter fabric set for this installation. And this was a large hydro mulch area. It was over, I think, 7 acres possibly for this area. I'm sorry, this was three acres, and we used 13 cubic yards of riprap. All right, next slide. So this was HPR 11 as we're driving up West Lilac Road. As you can see, those are some avocado trees. They look like they partially survived the fire. So this we couldn't get far up with our truck, so we did kind of a buffer strip. So we were able to go about 25 feet, install the hydro mulch. We also installed on the bottom right picture, we installed some gravel bags to try to slow the velocity of the water going into the inlet at the bottom. And we also installed check dams along the swale line. And again, we had the road crews come out, clean the swale, and we were able to install the check dams. All right, next slide. So this was one of the high priority. This is HPR 12. Prior to the rain event, we thought this was identified as a location we wanted to try and get to prior to the rain. So we were able to try to, what we did here, we put some gravel bags along that wall to try to stabilize that wall as much as we could, and then also installed a inlet protection device prior to the culvert. And you can see what happened in the rain event. It looks like there's some channelized flow that went through the hydro mulch that was applied. So that wasn't too effective and kind of overtopped that structure we built. So it was kind of a messy situation. Okay, next slide, please. And so after the rain event, we came back and we cleaned the area out. We put the riprap prior to going into the culvert. We also installed a new 3-bag high gravel bag check dam. This is one of the few sites that we actually did do the fiber rolls along the contours of the slope to try to slow the velocity of the water coming down. And you can see this was after some subsequent rain events. You can see all the vegetation growth. There's probably like 2 feet of vegetation behind the check dams, and it was effective for the next storm events that hit this area. Okay, next slide. So this is HPR 13. this was a large, as you can tell, we put more hydro mulch in this area. We also installed some inlet protection devices and some check dams prior to going into the inlet. Okay, next slide. So this is HPR 14. Again, we did inlet protection for that culvert, and then we did a check dam type structure about 2 bags high above it to try to slow the velocity of the water. That was a large burned area above it. I guess we could have used fiber rolls potentially to do this as well, but when our crews were basically had gravel bags, burlap gravel bags, so we just utilized them. It was more efficient and quick to implement. As you can see the big cactus type structures. So just for any of these structures, you have to make sure you have good professional judgment when you're installing these structures. That's why typically the approach was to have a QSP, a qualified SWIP developer, along with the erosion control crews. The QSP would ensure that the structures were built correctly, and also make sure that the material and also keep track of all the material as well. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the Rancho Monserrate Mobile Home Park. This is the area where there was a lot of damage to the homes. Here's one of the, on the left, there's one of the streets where they lost a lot of homes. As you can see, there's a lot of debris, a lot of ash in these areas. So during a storm event, this will all go into that. On the right, there's one drop inlet that all this debris goes into. So we made a inlet protection around the drop inlet. We lowered the weir to 1 bag because there's so much flow. We actually had to adjust this a couple of times to make sure that the water was going into the inlet. It was effective, a lot of debris behind it. But on the left, you see, this was the homeowners and the CAL FIRE crews were out at this community too. And so they did some, which I think is an excellent BMP, they did source control around the damaged areas to try to minimize the debris and flow from entering into the street and the drainage system. So that was a very effective BMP for this scenario. So this is Old Highway 395. There's existing culverts that go under this road. We wanted to protect the culverts through inlet protection, and just gives an idea of how these areas are hard to access. You can see the erosion control crews and our QSPs, mobilizing to these areas, which was challenging. Next slide. You have to get creative when we're installing these. You have to use natural type. There's rocks, so you can key the check dams into the rocks. As you can see in the bottom slide, when there's a fire, this was all vegetation before. All these things. There was a lot of glass in here, broken bottles. And you can see the old refrigerator that's in this channel. So you just have to be very careful when you're doing these types of works because you're not sure what you're going to find. All right, next slide.
Really quick, if I can interject one thing. We understand we're getting towards 1 o'clock. If people need to leave, we will post an edited, slimmed-down version of this presentation onto our YouTube channel. However, if you can continue to watch, we will continue going on past 1 so that we can get this information out there. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And then here's HPS1. This is the Rancho Monserrate Mobile Home Park. You can see this is a woman's probation crew that actually that was through CAL FIRE. So this site was a coordination between the county and CAL FIRE. The county supplied about 8 pallets, so about 800 gravel bags. You can't see it, but by the house is way at the bottom. So this woman's probation crew hiked up all the gravel bags, staged them along these areas, and then they also went installed them all. So this was quite an effort and a good coordination. And you can see that some of this area in particular was hit by a previous fire in 2014, I believe. So you can see the existing gravel, the existing structures there. So we use the existing structures. We beefed them up. We took bags. We refilled bags with some of the sand there, and yeah, it was a really good effort. So I'm going to pass this along to Mehdi now for the Erosion Control Center.
Hello everyone, my name is Mehdi Khalili. I'm a civil engineer with the County of San Diego Flood Control Engineering, and to be respectful of everybody's time, I'll try to go as fast as I can. While René's group were protecting and assessing the public right-of-way and public roads, some of our other coworkers and myself were assisting private homeowners. And the first thing that we did was to assess the area and determine the best location to stage our erosion control homeowners assistance center, which ended up being at the Monza road station, marked with a yellow mark here. Next, please. This is an aerial view of the area. As you can see, there's a lot of open space which was damaged by the fire. Next, please. This is a closer look at the Monza road station. Next, please. And this shows the layout. People would enter through the entrance, park in the parking area, and then the red arrows show the flow of customers and constituents that were being assisted. We had set up a temporary tent, which is labeled as check-in area. And next was fiber rolls and sandbags. The customers had the option of taking empty sandbags and fill them up with gravels or sand at their property, which would make it easier for transfer, or fill them up on site. Although anytime that we were not assisting customers, we were busy filling up sandbags so that the customers wouldn't have to do that themselves. We also provided local seeds for them to use. Although one morning when we arrived to open the erosion control center, we realized that the storm last night and the strong winds had blown away our temporary tent. So our road crew kindly allowed us to move our check-in area to the permanent tent that they had set up across. Next, please. This shows us trying to set up our new check-in area. Our erosion control center was open 66 days, 25 rotating staff assisted staffing the road station, from flood control, watershed protection, private development, construction, inspection, roads, wastewater, and CIP sections. We were open 7 days a week, and we assisted about 150 property owners. Now, the property owners had two options to receive assistance. Any property owner who was within the red main fire area perimeter would be entitled to receiving a certain amount of BMPs, best management practices, which included 50 sandbags, 4 fiber rolls each, coming with 7 stakes and 1 bag of seed. If a property owner believed that they needed more material, we would be happily going to their site, do an assessment, or even if they didn't need more BMPs, but they just simply needed some professional advice, we would visit their site after them giving us their written consent through the form that René mentioned earlier, and we would give them some verbal advice and also provide them with a drawn-up erosion control plan on how to implement it. Next, please. As you can see, the yellow pins shows every property that received assistance from us. As you can see, there are properties that were affected by patch fires outside of the red main fire area. This shows how far the fire can spread. Next, please. The BMPs that we used included fiber rolls, sandbags, and a combination of local seeds that we provided to the customers. Next, please. This shows the sand mix. If you click twice, it shows the type of plants that these are local plants and do not need much irrigation. Although we did recommend to the property owners to try and avoid planting these close to their structures, because if they were not to be maintained properly down the line, they would become a fire hazard themselves when they dry up. A lot of education sheets and educational material were provided to the constituents to assist them in how to best utilize the BMPs that were provided to them. Next, please. These are some flyers. They were available in both English and Spanish. There were a lot of locals that needed Spanish material, and that was available to them. Next, please. Our website was up to date and provided information on when and how we are open. Next, please. For this last slide, I'm going to turn it back to René. Thank you.
So lastly, all these efforts were happening during the holidays, so we all had to take a lot of our time available, especially during weekends and during holidays, to take care of these efforts. So the holiday tree is a reminder. It was taken in a fast food restaurant in the area where we were having lunch. That's a reminder of what was going through during that time. And the photo to the left is a row of cypress trees. That's what burned cypress trees look like. So it's a reminder of, yes, we are serving the public and we're doing it during the holidays. So thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the technical difficulties.